welcome everyone to Season 2, Episode 5 of the Ready or Not podcast, live from the National League of Cities Congressional City Conference here in Washington, D.C. We are honored to be graced, if you will, with Bob Knight and Kim McKinley, our guests for today, representing their collective capacity as the American Association of Public Broadband, and in their individual capacity, Bob with a number of different titles we'll get to. Kim is CMO for Utopia Fiber. And so let's jump right in. So, welcome to the Ready or Not podcast. It's good to see you all.
Good to see you, Scott.
How are you? I'm doing well. As you all know by now, we've been on the traveling broadband circuit for a while. You all are friends, you all are colleagues, and you also post a lot to social media and LinkedIn about Bob's your diamond first class request and Kim your coach class request. So can we talk about the history of the friendship and how much fun you all have on social media?
1,000%. There's a lot to unpack.
No. I'm going to start. I have low standards for my besties in broadband is what I'm going to start with.
Clearly. And I don't like to sit in the back of the plane. When you're built like this, and the seat is this big, and when you travel as much as I do, you sit in the front. However, the best part of first-class air travel is watching Kim on the same flight walk past you with the mobile phone.
Yeah.
Bye.
I've gotten that look before once or twice, sitting in first class.
When I'm all the way in coach,
Yeah.
he's like,
Hi.
Yeah,
The
very
best part is
enthusiastically
her boss, Roger
bragging.
Timmerman at Utopia Fiber. Her boss now is in on it too. So when he gets the upgrade, he's sitting up there, and he will now send me videos of Kim sitting a few rows back.
So let me clear this up. Are these upgrade requests or upgrade fulfillment, or do you actually?
It's a mix.
Okay.
It's a mix, Scott. It's a mix.
Okay, it's a mix.
Sometimes
okay. Kicking the podcast off, talking about
we can
first
edit
class.
all this.
I
I'm
love
sorry.
it. No,
Yeah.
obviously
I mean,
we've
you
been
have
having
chunks.
conversations.
Yeah, coins.
But Scott started
Sure.
this off
We are about to have our 6th anniversary of our friendship.
Oh,
Where we
really?
met? Yeah, or 5th. Maybe 5th.
7th?
Or 7th. Who knows? We met at Broadband Communities Conference 5 years ago when Bob was the guy in the audience that asked way too much questions.
Wow.
Too many questions. I mean, we've all been at those conferences where you want to throw candy at that person. Well, Bob was
And I
that
was
person.
the guy.
Scott's questions are long-winded. Not so many questions, but just a long,
Got a lot to say.
comparable.
You know?
Continue.
Very
Sorry.
I love it at the broadband conferences when someone gets up and turns it into open mic night.
Oh, we experienced that yesterday.
Right? It's
Yeah.
like someone gets up, I would like to pontificate.
Right. Where's the question, sir? That's
There is no
usually the
question,
response.
ma'am. We're just going to keep
Oh,
nouns
God.
and verbs and nouns. We will get there.
It depends on the moderator if they'll shut them down or not.
Yeah.
Some moderators will be like,
Let you go on for
yeah. So.
Now, Scott is a tough moderator. I don't know if you know that. Scott and I were on a panel together last year, spring of 2022,
Yes.
and Scott runs a tight ship. I think the woman next to me was going to kill me, much like today. She was a lady from the nonprofit public interest sector. She thought that everything was going well with that BEAD hadn't been announced quite yet, but it was about to be announced, and she and I had a different
Philosophical view.
Oh, you know what it was?
Yeah.
It was about state broadband directors.
Yes.
And she felt that the state broadband directors were really plugged in. And as we all know, there's a handful who are really plugged in, and the rest are, trying to figure out, if for lunch is white or wheat or whatever,
Bob, would you like the host to actually host the podcast, or would you like to host the podcast?
But that's a great segue. We started talking about BEAD and state broadband directors, and I would love to get your take on, if you had any, I'm sure you do, thoughts on BEAD and the implementation of it, and state broadband directors' ability to do local coordination, which I know that
Are you asking us, Shannon, to trash the state broadband directors?
No, not trash.
no.
Obviously not trash. I mean, I want to get your hot takes.
Yeah,
Hot
first
takes
of
on
all,
these
BEAD
things.
was announced by last year, but the no-foes were about to come out from BEAD.
No foes.
Correct. But I think the state broadband directors are in a very precarious situation because a lot of them are very new, and coming from two people who worked at NTIA, the NTIA has recruited a lot of the former state broadband officers up to NTIA. So you have a lot of newbies in the state broadband offices who are responsible for millions and millions of dollars and the future of their state. I think it's, first of all, I'm impressed anybody's taking those jobs because it's a thing that you will never win at. No matter what direction you go, somebody's going to criticize you. It is a very tough job, and I think it will be interesting to see how they handle it. I don't know. I think some states are very well prepared for what's coming, and I think some are just flailing. Yeah. And I think it's the state by state.
But I think the example that I like to give is last year I was on a panel with Maureen Neighbors, who's the state broadband director from Alabama, and she came from power, right? She came from the power utility side, and she was regulating power at the state level. And so, she, obviously, the powers that be, state government said, okay, well, phone poles and pole attachments, so you're going to be the state broadband director. and listen, Maureen's a talented, public servant. She knows her way around, and she figured it out. But at this conference, the lobbyist from the Cable Association was her shadow, and if Maureen stopped walking, the lady would run right into her behind. And look, the lobbyist, lovely person, very, very nice. I've seen her a number of times. I can't remember her name, and I like her hugely. And she's very, very smart and very good at what she does. But that's her assignment. And you take a bunch of individuals, you put them in a new office with new policy that's coming down and a lot of money, and you have really highly trained, highly educated lobbyists who are there to influence.
Right.
And that's the tension. And now on top of that, layer on mapping and the trials and tribulations with mapping and everything else, and you have yourself a nice cocktail of crap.
Of stuff.
Yeah.
Of stuff.
Yeah, of stuff.
All right. Speaking of cocktail of stuff, let me steer this back so you see why now we invited Bob and Kim on. They are knowledgeable of all things broadband. But I'm going to start by guest bios, right? So I'm going to go through your bios. We'll keep yours short because you sent us a story and a half. So Bob Knight is the president and CEO of Harrison Edwards, and he's also the Commissioner of Economic and Community Development for the town of Ridgefield, Connecticut. He is both a broadband industry professional and a public official, which is a rare skill set to have.
I'm not good at either.
As the president of CEO of Harrison Edwards, an integrated marketing agency based in Armonk, New York.
That was close.
How you say
Armonk.
Armonk.
There was an extra syllable in there, Scott.
I'm trying. Specializing in sectors including telecommunications, economic development, government, cannabis, crisis management, and healthcare. And he's also one of the founding members, again, of the American Association of Public Broadband. Kim McKinley is Deputy Director and Chief Marketing Officer of Utopia Fiber. She leads that since 2010, She's a member of its turnaround team and has helped cement today Utopia Fiber as the fastest growing, highest rated, and most successful, open access network in the United States. Day to day, Kim actively leads Utopia's marketing, sales, order fulfillment, and customer service teams, and you will see them a lot of the conferences and events across the country, and a newly appointed board member of the Fiber Broadband Association as well. So
congratulations.
That's the stage that we have. maybe that's the stage that we have set today. We've invited them to join us because we're here at the tail end of the National League of Cities Congressional City Conference in Washington, D.C. And before we dive into that, I'll turn it over to Shannan, our co-host, to go through a list of events that's going on in the community, and then we'll jump into the deep dive with Bob and Kim.
Yes,
Shannan?
Wonderful. Thanks, Scott, and thank you, too, for being here. I'm so excited. We're going to have a good time. But let me do my due diligence. Typically with the podcast, we go over some of the highlights in the community. The Broadband.io community is our digital platform where we have almost 2,000 members that engage with us and keep everyone up to date on all the comings and goings in the broadband industry.
I remember that.
Oh, you are? Yes, exciting. Okay, well, I haven't seen you in the community posting, though.
Because I don't really post, I just stalk.
You're a lurker.
She's
a lurker. I'm going to call you out now.
She's a lurker.
Make him have a post today.
Okay.
First, so we had our last episode was with Joe Valandra of Tribal Ready. He is the CEO and president of that organization. And during that podcast episode, we talked about the launch of the virtual tribal broadband office and his efforts to coordinate the needs of the different tribal nations across the country to ensure that their voices are heard. Can you guys talk a little bit about the work of AAPB, and do you have any representatives from tribal nations in your organization?
I was going to let you go first, Mr.
Ladies first.
Right now, we do not have any representation from tribal. We're just in the beginning stages of launching AAPB. We launched it last year. One of the things that we were very enthusiastic members, governmental appointed people, and myself who works as a governmental agency, well, we thought a C6 status with the IRS would take a month. Well, we maybe slightly underestimated that like 8 months later when we finally got the C6 status. So we're in the beginning stages right now of really gaining the membership, and we have a huge base of members throughout the country, but not yet tribal. I think we'll get there, but we are not there yet. We just are getting everything in place, and unfortunately I have to work with this guy who is not the easiest to work with.
Well, you know, we have engaged with some tribal leaders, and some of the tribal
They
leaders.
asked for membership, not who we've engaged with.
The answer is it's not for lack of trying, but we're going to keep at it as we continue to build the base for AAPB.
Awesome,
Yeah.
awesome. All right, so we also had an AMA with Jade Piros de
Ask me
Carvalho.
anything.
AMA stands for Ask Me Anything.
Not the
We
American
had-
Music Awards.
No,
Not the American Music
Okay.
Awards.
close, but we're getting there.
Although
Yeah.
maybe we should host live streams of the award shows on the.
Mhm.
That would
That'd
be
be
funny.
fun.
Yeah.
So
Jade
Jade's star is rising.
Yeah.
You know, all of a sudden,
Absolutely.
and she's getting a lot of social media. She
She has an interesting perspective.
she does.
She said, "You are the cavalry." That was one of her Jadeisms, as our CEO Jace would call them, where she just really emphasized people organizing, getting together, and having an influence on the broadband planning process, which sounds like what you're trying to do with AAPB. Could you speak more about how you feel about that, like the need to organize among ourselves to influence government?
Absolutely.
Well, that's how it came together. You know, so Utopia, you're a consortium of 11 cities. Organized.
Who own us? Yes. 11.
And you know, I represent town of Richfield, Connecticut, and one of the things that sort of a number of us were kind of horrified during the pandemic, that the conversation, whether it was the interim treasury rules, whether it was ARPA, whether it was BEAD, conversation sort of went back to the same old, and it took us a long time to get into this national broadband mess. And the way a lot of the legislation was written and the rules were written kind of cemented in sort of the same policies that got us into the mess. And we realized that community networks didn't have a voice in that conversation and didn't have a seat at the table. And simultaneously, National League of Cities, we're here at NLC, there was a group of about 17 or 18 of us that had a meeting with the White House during the pandemic, probably 2021. And we were talking about about the interim treasury rules. And, we argued that they had to set the standards, higher than 25 over 3. We were pushing for 100 over 100 to get, symmetrical, which means fiber, because we just didn't want the country to spend a lot of money and make the same mistakes over and over again. And ultimately, NLC did a great job in lobbying efforts, and the other city leaders did a great job, communicating this to the White House. But ultimately, we got the rules, we got the language done, and we were kind of surprised, as sort of jaded people. We're like, what is this really going to matter? We're like, oh wow, people can actually do this, and so it sort of morphed into AAPB. We're like, community networks need to have a voice, and local community choice needs to have a voice.
Well, I think at the end of the day, Utopia is big enough that they can have a voice, right? And we could be out there. But people are still spewing our story in an incorrect manner.
Right.
And there's a lot of community broadbands or communities, smaller rural communities, who want a choice in it, and they don't have enough voice or manpower to be out there representing them. So it's, why couldn't we create an organization that compiles all that and brings one bigger voice for a national state level to really make those changes that you're talking about?
And I think, Shannon and Scott, one of the things that was so important to us is that to be a voting member on the board of AAPB, you have to be a public official. because there's so many industry groups that are out there that can be bought and sold very easily. And so when everyone has a voice, nobody has a voice. And so we needed to keep the message pure. So we welcome industry, we welcome vendors to become members, but in order to be on the board, and in order to be a voting member, you have to be a public official representing a community that has a fiber project. Now, it doesn't matter if you want to partner.
It doesn't have to have a fiber project. They just can be in any stages of looking at it
Correct.
as well.
You know, thinking about building, operating, you know,
Right.
whatever the case may be. But, you know, we welcome, you know, the incumbents, you know, because they have a voice. And if you want to partner, if your community wants to partner with tier 1 provider like an AT&T or Verizon, we think it's great.
So let me jump in there.
If you want to build your own open access network and be municipally owned, or if you want to be ISP, we think it's great. We want to make sure that you have that choice and are not legislatively harmed.
Let me jump in there, because you talked about sort of the misconception of municipal networks, community networks, but you're talking about, you know, ISPs, incumbents are welcome. What are some of the misnomers or that people get wrong about your view of, you know, public-private partnerships or working with private providers that you can correct?
A lot of them think they're just not successful, and they hear the one sound clip. We know that the press always only tells the truth when you go out to market, right? But they'll hear of you say, for example, Utopia. There is a time that we were not successful, and we deserve the moniker of being the most failed municipal broadband project in the country. But since 2009, we've done over $300 million worth of bonds that are being paid back solely by subscriber revenue and not touching taxpayers' dollars. But what I see a lot is people will go back to 2007 and want to tell that story. And yes, we won't shy away from that story at all. We'll say it's part of our growth. What happened? We learned what not to do. And we probably, if there was something to do, we probably did it. And we probably did it 3 times before we learned our lesson. But we have grown, and we wanted to, and we have been successful. And what a lot of things that people don't recognize, they'll say, at least for that, it's government overstepping into, you know, the private sector. Well, if the private sector was really delivering, would the cities even consider it as an option? They wouldn't.
So did I ever tell you the story that when I testified in front of the Connecticut General Assembly, the Technology Energy Committee, and I was.
Are you trying to impress me right now?
No, if I was trying to impress you, I would not be sharing that. Believe me. But bunch of, well, whatever. So I was there. Ellen Katz used to head up the state broadband office, and she assembled a number of people, you know, from across the state who were broadband advocates. So we were sharing, hey, you know, this 5G thing really isn't going to be the answer. You really need broadband. You need to allow all models in it. So, you know, straight out of central casting, right? The telecom lobby just brings one in after the other. Municipal networks fail. You know, they're terrible. They do this, they do that, whatever. They're taking old data, just like the utility. You know, they're cherry picking. Not only cherry picking neighborhoods, they're cherry picking old data. Oh, well, this network failed, and this one in Connecticut failed, and this one in Georgia failed, and this. And you know, early on, we know that the early adopters always have some growing pains.
But how often do you hear that, like anybody attacking all the private networks that have gone under, or all the private networks that have suffered? We all go through those growing pains. Some die on the vine, and some succeed, and that happens in every industry, and that happens in government. Government's not always going to be successful at every venture they do, but if you learn and pivot, that's where some of the best networks have come from. I mean, some of the oldest networks are, up in Grant County, Washington, is the oldest network in the country.
Community network and first open access in the country, and they're just thriving. They built out to a county that's the size of Rhode Island, building up these, and they have more to go, but they're doing great.
So you hit on something earlier that I think is important to note, because we talk a lot generally about community engagement. How do you have the conversations? In what ways do you facilitate them so that special interests aren't overwhelming the direction of policies? And you said, like, your requirement is that you have to be a public official in order to sit on the board, and that you carefully consider the balance of interests when you have private sector partners be a part of your organization. Can you speak more about that? I come from a background where we did a lot of standards development, and it's like balance of interests and when people can participate, and he gets really bored when I talk about these things, but you know, if you really want to be a neutral broker in a meaningful way, you have to kind of have certain guardrails in place so that some conversations are overwhelmed by certain.
Before you talk, I need to ask, Shannan, can you develop some standards for my dating life? I just want to make sure I can help you with that.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone who follows the podcast knows that every episode, Shannan, she talks about her time at NIST.
13 years plus, I was there.
Or that she went to Harvard Kennedy School. So we know that's a theme.
I didn't say Harvard yet.
No, not yet. It's coming.
You
No,
said
that's a
it.
theme. That's a theme in every podcast.
It's not.
She's gonna run NIST one day after this is over with. So she loves NIST.
I think that's impressive. Congratulations,
Absolutely.
Shannan.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
All to create standards for wow.
You're really singing
Standards
well.
and technology, right?
Oh my
Absolutely.
They must be so proud in Cambridge right now. Well, you could call it the Lowered Expectations podcast now. Just rebrand, Scott, and it'll be fine.
Only for this episode. No, I'm joking.
Well, I think the standard where you need to start with is.
Are we talking about Kim's dating life?
I'm
sorry.
Gosh, I
I'm
really
just
want to
trying to
know
get
the
the
answer to the
context.
Okay.
questions,
I'm trying to get the context
Jeez.
together.
Follow along at home, folks. This is where it gets interesting.
All right.
It's the same standards, right?
Yes, it is.
For
Yeah.
both community engagement on broadband and for Kim's dating life, right? You start with a community need first, and then work your way backwards from there. So just like Kim's suitors, right? You talk to the cops, you talk to the firefighters, talk to the healthcare folks, right?
All the local stakeholders.
All the local
that have
stakeholders. Talk to the PTA moms, get a little saucy here, and you really find out, what needs are not being met.
You're not touching that one.
And you start there, and then you develop your community standards,
Absolutely.
and then everything else falls into play after that.
Did you
Yeah.
do this in this? Is this one of the things that you
Absolutely.
covered? Okay.
Gathered information from a diversity of stakeholders. That's the first step.
Absolutely.
What are the needs?
But it's also building trust,
Building
right?
trust.
Because it's talking through credible messengers is incredibly important.
Having the right messengers out there, and not every really champion is not the person you need in the community.
Oh my
going
gosh,
out.
champions.
I'm saying.
I love champions, but they're a double-edged sword, right? You get some really enthusiastic young man to show up hey guys, we need a broadband project. Everyone's like, right? So it's
For Utopia alone, we almost lost the project because a very enthusiastic young gentleman was out there representing the brand of Utopia, and the city actually thought it was us. It wasn't us. They were just advocating that they wanted us to come to the city, which actually turned south.
So that's kind of counterintuitive, right? Because you want people who are enthusiastic, but when there's a lot of group dynamics that happen when you're trying to make change. You don't want the guy that's overly enthusiastic and just talks too much and is not really helpful or
trying to force it down the throat.
Right.
Yeah.
You want people to gel. You want people to be productive together, and that kind of group dynamic is something.
So it's almost like dating, right?
I knew you were going to say
Bring it back.
Back to
You
dating.
you want to find a nice, normal person. like you go on a first date, right? I haven't been on a first date
I'm about
since
to say
1999. That was my last first date, 1999, right? Been with my wife ever since, right? Okay, so.
How high are her standards?
Start with community
that was
engagement.
a perfect timing.
Yes.
Yes.
Right? And is alcohol involved?
You're
Part of
the
this,
zing.
right? All those things.
Ben, take notes.
But
Edits.
I'm
So-
engaged.
So, it's like dating, right? You have to start. You can't just throw every bit of information at people and expect that they're going to be really interested. You start where they are, right? Yeah, it really sucks on snow days that you're trying to work from home and your kids are using the Wi-Fi for something else, and you get buffering and your Zoom calls messed up, right? Start where they are. You don't just we're gonna go GPON or XGS PON,
XGS PON.
right? You lose people right away.
Yeah. Let's
Kim
go.
says it all the time, right? Broadband industry, biggest collection of virgins, under one roof.
Okay, first of all, I did not.
We gotta
Yay.
explain. You gotta look into the camera and explain
We're
that
alive.
concept.
Right there.
Right here.
We're a lot of
Right there.
It's a lot of techie people, and we like to focus more of our time on work than other activities, our social life.
Oh my God.
Oh, you meant literal version.
You haven't been around the industry long enough,
Can I
have you?
jump right into the we got?
Oh wait, I got one
They-
couple.
They
couple
didn't
more
teach you that
things.
at the Kennedy School, did they?
What kind of education was this? Actually, education.
My nerdy brain is
They will
somehow.
never have us back.
Oh,
All
we'll
right.
do part 2.
We had another
Absolutely.
AMA with the National Rural Electric Cooperative Association
Mhm.
that we hosted on the community. They discussed how they'd be providing support to RECs to participate in BEAD. Do you all have an opinion on that? Do you have involvement of RECs in your organization at all? Rural Electric Cooperatives.
Rural Electric. I was like REC.
Right,
I've
so
never
they're-
heard that
sorry.
acronym.
So they're not, you know, you have to be an appointed official, an elected, or city staff, or municipal staff. So they technically don't fall into place. They could become memberships if they want to. They're being served, you know, the
Yeah,
rural electric co-ops are being served, and they do a great.
I think they're the ones who
role.
are building the most right now, which we're
Totally.
really seeing executed projects on the co-ops. We don't necessarily on the RECs, now that I knew a new acronym, but we are working closely with APPA, which is the Public Power
Public Power
Association. So it's somewhere of like we're working in different avenues of how to reach people and
Right.
people who are working in this space right now.
But the idea is collaboration and working
Collaboration,
together,
I mean,
common solutions.
Absolutely,
Right,
with rural
absolutely.
like organizations who are representing those guys, we all want to come together to solve the broadband problem, and it's not going to happen with us going alone at it. It's just not.
But I think it's important to mention that 2 of the 5 board members come from either utility districts or from power utilities. So Scott Menhart from Traverse City Light and Power, publicly owned, community owned electric utility that's building out a fiber project in their city, and they're having a great deal of success. Angela Bennick, who is our chair, she's general manager of Kitsap Public Utility District in Washington State. Now they don't do power, they do, I think, water or sewer and broadband. You know, sewer and broadband tend to go together.
In some
quite
places,
nicely.
depending on where you are, your connection is.
Sometimes your connection's in the sewer,
In the sewer.
in the
I
conduit.
was going to say something
Oh,
else.
that's
but-
so gross. Even if I could, sorry.
Some municipal engineers can be a little gross.
Yeah, got to get down in the mud.
I think if we expand the board, and there's been talk about it.
I know this is good.
How do you follow a
This
show
might
like
be-
this
might be the smartest
with a shovel?
room that we have in there. All right.
No, but when we expand the board, you know, we want to have a digital equity player, and we do want to have a tribal broadband player on the board. We've talked about that.
And one thing, and I will talk about one of the initiatives that we have going on right now is that we have a mentorship program going on for like, so whatever kind of entity you are, we can match you with an entity inside of our organization who's been through different various steps of the process. So if they're at the what technology they need to pick, and we'll partner with one of our members who's gone through this. It's kind of like we want people to work with people who've been there before. And understand some of the like challenges that are going to happen, because this is not an easy process. It's never going to be easy. We wish it would, but it's not a one-stop solution for anyone.
And particularly in the digital equity space, there are, I think there's some really good programs that are out there. I think, you know, you're starting to see some real success, but you've also seen, you know, digital equity, it's a tough play, and it's tough to execute it the right way. So really just putting you know, leaders in touch with other leaders who are having success.
Yep.
We think that's a really good formula for, you know, success breeds success.
And how to market digital equity, I think that's one of the biggest factors that as we go forward, because a lot of people want digital equity, but they don't know what's happening behind the scenes. And you have to tell your community that you're doing this for your community as well.
And that's one of the things that we've done. Sorry, with our podcast is moving from advocacy to action. Right, beyond just focusing on the maps, beyond just focusing on infrastructure, you have to have a focus on the equity component.
Yep.
And which you all know is the actual people that we want to touch with broadband and the services and being able to move forward. Shannan, you want to say something?
Right, I was going to say that the last update is one of our community ambassadors did a story on the Benton Institute study on ACP and implementation of it, and it said that half of the households that are eligible for it haven't even heard of it.
No.
Yeah,
right.
unaware. They're totally unaware of the program. Yeah.
So what are your thoughts about the program and why people may be unaware or not interested in signing up?
Wow, you're just like going for a hot button question. I think the initial problem with ACP is because they didn't give any ISPs really any money to market the program. They were like, you're going to go do this out of the kindness of your heart. Well, people who are in the ISP business, if they're not municipally owned or have some stake in the community, why would they do it, right? Why would they allocate resources for it? I think you are seeing that change, and I think a lot of people at communities and city halls are seeing that. So you're starting to see them engage in that community who applies, who can get the ACP. But I think you're seeing it ramp up. You're seeing the applications go up for ACP. I think the scared thing where I'm seeing people being a little hesitant on the ACP is, will the money will we get more money for ACP? So why even go down this road if the program is going to be out of money?
Right.
So.
No, I agree. It's a tough place to be, but I've been criticizing the FCC for months, if not years, so I'm gonna stay away from that.
I thought everybody loved the FCC.
Yeah, well, they do.
A lot about it here
Yeah.
at NLC,
Yeah.
ACP.
So let's.
But Scott, to your point, the FCC can be out there, wringing their hands to the very 2-2 commission.
So again, this goes back to our initial point, and this has always been my criticism when federal agency, anyone, agency rolls out things that actually impact people, when you don't have people who know people.
That's right.
So we roll out these public policy initiatives without the frame of reference and context of actual people that you want to impact, right? And so, like you said, deadlocked at 2-2, we're going to do the most, bland thing we can do politically from a public policy perspective. No real context on how this really impacts regular people. And one of the things that we've done with Ready and Broadband Money, we've developed, an ACP turnkey solution that makes it easier for people to sign up, because you're asking someone who may or may not have a device, may or may not have internet connection, to download static PDFs from the FCC and take a picture of their driver's license and upload all of these, and that's like, what the hell are we doing?
If you could do that, you would have a good internet connection.
Absolutely. If I could do that, I probably wouldn't need the ACP program.
I will say, though, on a positive note, I don't want to forget to mention that the FCC did launch the grant program to help market
after
the
the
ACP.
fact.
And this was just a first round. They just announced today that there will be additional funding
for the ACP.
For the
For a
ACP
program
outreach
that may or may
grant
not
program.
be funded after this year, but we'll see.
I'm
Again,
trying to be
I know
balanced.
you are. You're trying to
Okay,
be
and have a
balanced.
positive.
But
Standards.
Standards Institute of
Fairness.
what's this?
Didn't
Neutrality.
Harvard taught you this? The standards?
No.
NIST taught me that.
What did
Not so
Harvard
much-
teach you?
Not so much.
Wait a second, you dated a guy from Harvard. That was ridiculous. What did Harvard teach you?
Nothing.
All right, so we're going to. As you can see, Bob and Kim are knowledgeable on all things dating, broadband, ACP.
Dating,
you name it.
maybe not so much.
This is the takeaway.
This is the
Dating and
takeaway.
broadband, same questions for both
There's
audiences.
a lot of synergy, right? in
Lots of
broadband,
synergy.
right? So let's get into why we're here. So this is the NLC's Congressional City Conference. This is your first time here. What are your thoughts on the conference? Your time here? City Conference?
I've got my take. There are a lot of suits here, and I haven't seen. I'm in the broadband world, and there is not a lot of suits in the broadband world. What would you like?
DC.
Well, what would you like? This is what Bob. Can you tell me what a broadband conference looks like?
Well, let's just say a broadband 8 is the rest of the world 6, right? Can we agree on that, right? So broadband, it's okay. Broadband conferences, right? Overweight, middle-aged, bald guys wearing golf shirts with outdated logos. That's everyone at a broadband conference.
That's the industry.
Right?
That's the industry.
That's the industry.
Yeah,
that's the industry standard.
Absolutely.
Standard.
Is
That's
broadband keeping polos and stuff?
They're just hoarding old polos. Like, MCI, WorldCom, wow! We've landed on the
I'm gonna
moon!
rock this today. I'm gonna wow in my standard polo with the
Jordache.
Wow.
Jordache. It's French.
I love the energy at this conference. I think
Oh
there's
my
a lot of
God, yeah.
excitement.
Yeah.
There's great music.
Yeah.
There's people who are just passionate to change their communities, and I think that's great to see that energy, and to see that these people are here and they're public servants because they want to better this country. And I think that we hear a lot of rhetoric on TV of what's happening, but you get all these people who have different politics across the country, and they all rally together, and I love seeing that, and I think that brings hope.
Well, it's nice in a venue like this where, there's no cameras and, R's and D's can mingle and people are really talking about, how to really help folks. And I think at the local level, in cities, towns, villages, and even counties, that's where the real work gets done. That's the person-to-person kind of thing. And I do want to give a shout out to Angelina Panettiere, who's the lobbyist for National League of Cities. she is so effective. She's so good at her job, and you know,
such a nice person as well.
And a nice person, and you know, she put together a lot of this conference, a lot of the panels, and she's been totally effective. You know, I mean, she's working on a lot of the broadband initiatives too for NLC, and just totally great. And you know, it's a plug for NLC. I would say if your community is not a member and needs a voice, you know, in DC, they're the best.
Yeah, no, I love the diversity here. I love that they're medium cities, large cities, towns, villages, like you said. Every stripe, every color, every ethnic group, every political persuasion is here. But they all have one thing in mind, and they're working what's best for their community, right? Making decisions that impact their homes, businesses, residents the most.
Because they know it. They live it.
And the energy is there's so much energy here that I think it could captivate outside of the Marriott, which is where we are, to DC as a whole, right? Is that, you know, you can take what's best from every location, shake it up, and say, you know, here we are, let's go get it.
Are you about to make fun of Scott, Bob and I's Uber today?
I wasn't, but now that you mentioned it, they did take an Uber a half a block to a restaurant that's around the corner. I'm just saying, like, they need a reconnaissance would say, I walk out, I turn right.
5 miles.
You know, I wait 20 minutes on the Uber, I could have been there at the bar. It's okay though, it's okay. But
we're busy professionals.
You're busy. You know what? That is so true. You get so used to being in mode. Get off the plane, okay, Uber, cab, what am I doing? You know, the hotel's literally right across the street.
Dr. Jill Biden was here, the vibe was good, everyone was excited. You know, it was like, okay, where do we go? You know, I think we waited longer for the Uber than
it would have taken you to literally walk around.
We're going to go to the airport later, Bob. I think we should probably take an Uber. I'm just saying.
No, you got to take a cab.
A cab?
Yes,
wow.
DC cab.
We're going DC cab?
Yeah,
a little
DC
Mr. T reference there.
Absolutely.
Okay, so why are we taking DC cab as opposed to DC Uber?
I don't know, so I'm with you.
You just know the
Mr. T
DC
reference?
You wanted the Mr. T reference.
I did.
You wanted to throw that in.
You
I pity the fool who
Are
didn't
you
understand that.
I remember that reference.
I don't know. You all might not be old enough to understand.
Right here,
Bob and I.
Mr. T, like we have to wear.
Botox, guys. It's Botox. Thank you.
So let's fast forward a little bit. We talking about the NLC and local communities. Can you discuss the importance of local coordination and outreach, right, in your work, both individually, right, in your companies, but as the AAPB is now launching initiatives to galvanize support for municipal networks across the country. You know, how important is that local coordination and outreach, particularly to unserved and underserved communities?
I will let you, Bob, go for it. I'm just going to let you start because I know you're going to speak. Go for it.
I'm just still really excited about the Mr. T reference, and I sort of glazed over during the question. But we're talking about local outreach, and look, you know, all the policy, all the hard work, all the money, none of it matters unless it hits its intended purpose. And so you do have to have outreach. You do, and look, I mean,
I think it's education.
It's
too.
the marketing people, right? This is really about community education. And look, I'm here in my municipal role, not here to plug my company, but you know
But you are.
But look, the team at Harrison Edwards, you know, we have been like busting our butts for the last like year and a half just on this stuff because it's critical to get the word out and for people to understand it is public education. It's not advertising. It's not marketing. You're educating the public, but it's not just educating the public. It's educating local officials and the local stakeholders on it because, you know, there's so much influence that's out there that, you know, the local officials sort of have to champion, you know, where the money goes and how it gets spent.
But I think it's individualized, like education and awareness, because I think sometimes there's like these materials of this goes into your community. Well, do they understand this community? Or how do they cater to those materials? Because it's a different dynamic in every community that I go into of what that community needs from a outreach. And I think it goes back to there's just not a one-stop solution to this, and that's where you have to have the messaging is different, the outreach is different. How do you reach your citizens? Like even for me, it's what do you do? Facebook? What works? Or do you have next door in this community, or do you do like meetings? You have to reach. It's important, but you have to reach the residents where they are and meet them where they are.
That's a perfect segue to my next question, Kim. I want to address to you.
No.
Let you go first this time, and then Bob will jump in. You're talking about the launch of the AAPV and the role of municipal networks and community-based service providers to address the digital divide, particularly when we're talking about vulnerable communities, unserved, underserved, anchor institutions. What critical role do you see AAPB as well as community-based networks playing to bridge the digital divide?
Oh, this is a big question.
Oh, I love it.
I love this question.
Let's go.
I mean, if you're talking about, so AAPB represents community choice, but if you're talking solely municipal networks, I think if you're addressing municipal networks and the digital divide, one of the things that municipal networks do better than anyone else is they pass every home in the community. So the first point of stopping what the digital equity problem that we have is passing passing everybody's home so they have a chance, right? Because if they don't have a chance to connect, then we can't even get to the devices aspect and education part of digital equity. And I think somebody said this to me, a DC, pretty high person in DC who works for one of the senators here. They said, well, Utopia, you guys are just sitting here and saying that it's a utility. And I said, well, no, we don't think it's a utility. We're not going to charge everybody in the community as Utopia that they have to pay for it. We do it, it's whoever subscribes pays for the bonds that we have. But what we do believe it's a utility is that it should pass every home. Because we have to pass every home. And that's why some of the big incumbents have gotten in trouble in the past because they're based on ROI. Municipalities are based on their community and serving their community. So I think that's where I would say where the big role of why cities are looking at this, because when the ROI doesn't make sense, will some of the big players come to play?
So Rich Williams at Fiber Broadband Association is a huge proponent of this concept that he's been kicking around called the triple check. And I think it's brilliant. We were talking about this wherever city we were,
whatever I was sitting in economy and you're sitting in first class and we're texting. Yeah.
It was in one of the Carolinas.
North Carolina and Raleigh.
Raleigh, there we go. And so he had this concept like, it's not enough to check the box to say, fiber passes, Okay, so we should look at a triple check, a check for how many homes passed, how many homes connected, and then how many homes engaged, right? So it's great that you're connecting to fiber, great, but are you using the fiber? If you use for economic development, is it bringing the opportunity? The devices, all those things. And that third one's a little tricky, right? Because if you're an ISP or a network operator, you don't want to be looking into people's homes and seeing what they're doing on those networks. That's a privacy issue. But you want to get people engaged, to your point, and really utilizing the network and the opportunity it brings. Take the word broadband or fiber, whatever, and replace it with electricity and pretend it's 100 years ago, right? So what happens when you connect the blacksmith to electricity? What happens to the blacksmith's business? Scale and grow. What happens when you bring the electricity to a home? You can have refrigeration now. You can keep your food longer. You cook on the stove. You can have a light on at night. So, different times, certainly you didn't have a well-funded candle lobby saying, no, we're going to solve the problem. You don't need electricity. But
the Wax Makers Association of America.
Right. But you get the point. And I think it's that engagement piece.
And one thing I will say is I hear this all the time because you have all these programs. I can't think, it's the USF program. What's it called? Lifeline, ACP, who are out there and they're providing these minimal service qualities, right, to some degree, or the 10-3. What we represent is, why does somebody who may be economically disadvantaged have to be broadband disadvantaged? We want to provide them very robust connectivity to, if you want to end systematic poverty, you have to rise them up with better broadband.
So if someone's economically disadvantaged, should they not have electricity available to them?
Yeah, exactly.
Right? We would never say that. So why are we saying that?
Give them half the electricity access that
correct,
quote unquote regular people would have.
Yes.
Right.
Now you're cherry picking based on what?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Then we get into the difficult questions about historical practices and who gets what. And if you're going to base everything on the ability to pay, again, now you're segmenting the public based on some arbitrary factors
I think that cities believe this is infrastructure more than they ever have, and communities see that they're infrastructure more than they ever have. I mean, you're seeing people endeavor into muni networks and even other models like P3 models who have incumbents in their cities, and people are saying that they want better selection.
From what we've experienced and what we've heard, it's the pandemic. Right? Everyone migrated when you couldn't go outside and everyone was at home. some communities that had robust broadband connectivity, they thrived. I would say it wasn't difficult, it just wasn't as difficult. And then some communities were absolutely devastated.
Absolutely.
Right, and they were put back, a generation or more in terms of wealth building and income generation and educational opportunities, where some, they were creative. Yeah, it sucked, but for 2 years, we still met. We were able to conduct business. We were able to see
Have happy
family. We were
hours.
able to do virtual happy hours, right? It created several new virtual platforms that prior to the pandemic, none of us ever heard of, but now they're part of our lexicon. Like it creates these opportunities. But I do want to circle back on some criticism of community broadband or municipal broadband. So critics often say that allowing municipalities to compete with legacy or traditional ISPs are like a lot of letting like the referee playing the game.
We're throwing
chocolate now.
Standards.
Back to standards.
Do you think that's fair criticism? Those who know me know I don't play that. Almost said something.
Oh, but okay. I would say, and I can speak. I think it's they. First of all, I think the private sector has had a chance to come up and produce, and they haven't. Yeah. Until you bring in choice and overbuild, that's when you see the legacy networks upgrade. So tell me that they couldn't upgrade. You're seeing some big incumbents who said they couldn't upgrade were at their max, but when they get competition or threat of competition in there for their network, it's suddenly their network is upgradable, and you're seeing double the speeds. It's
and the prices drop.
And the prices drop, right?
Yeah, we've seen that in B-Top.
Magic.
This is
what movie where did that come from?
Hey, hold on, guys. I'm trying to be professional.
I'm sorry.
Once. I come from a state in Utah, which might be known to be a very conservative state.
Utah?
So, yeah,
really?
Shocking.
Never heard that.
And that we have one of the oldest municipal networks in the country, as second oldest or second biggest behind Chattanooga, EPB there. But we are legislatively prohibited from cities from offering retail services to compete with the private sector. So thus why we are in an open access model. It happened, before I started working there, but what you have seen by having open access, we believe it's the right way of role in government as my utopia role. But why do I think it's interesting is because you're letting private ISPs who've been in Utah for, started their business in 1994, like X Mission, who's the oldest ISP, could never compete and be in business today if they weren't on open access. So you're letting private businesses compete and have a chance if it gets big incumbents.
So let me follow up on that for our audience and members who may not know what open access is an open access model. Can you explain that? Essentially what that is and how that plays in your
I would say the easiest way to explain it, it's where the city owns the infrastructure, similar to an airport. So the city will own the airport but let private airlines run out of it. Delta, United, Southwest. Kudos to Delta because it's my favorite, Salt Lake City hub. But that's how it is in open access. That the cities build the infrastructure and allow private companies to compete on it. So on the residential side, we have 16 ISPs who compete directly head to head. So what it does is creates competition, price dropping, and better service. Right now, it is incredible to see, even at Utopia, we have a 4.6 rating. We just went up from 4.5 on Google with 2,000 ratings. And to see that in the telecommunications space is unheard of. Because when you have to compete, people will compete.
People get really creative when they have to compete.
And I think that's it. It's not even about open access, but it is about when the incumbents have to compete, they raise.
But the focus also is on the customer, right? You're now competing for the customer, not trying to make that ROI based on the construction investment that you've made to build out the network that you have to recoup and pay back your investors, right? But an ISP would say, oh no, we should factor all of that into the conversation and consideration, but they always leave out competing on that customer, what the customer experience is. Right?
I think it's when it's something like this. If you have competition in a broadband market, the residents' broadband cost goes down by $27 per month. So it is bringing competition. So you bring competition, whether it's muni or anything else, prices go down. And I think that's what we want, is that the customer have the best
service
experience.
go up too? Prices go down, service go up, services
That's
go
economics,
up.
right?
Right.
Like,
So broadband is like dating again, right? You start with the
With
customer
standards.
experience, and you work your way backwards from the customer
Does the
experience.
cost ever go down though? That's what my experience, it never goes down. It only goes up.
We gotta get Scott to Vegas, Kim. But we're running some data. So we have a broadband project in Richfield, and in 2001 during the pandemic, we did a poll of the community, and 94% of the community wanted the town to investigate a fiber network. And some of the terms that showed up in not only just the quantitative but the qualitative data was, it's a monopoly. We need choice. We need better options. We need this. We need that. And we just the vendor just completed a feasibility study for us now. And again, the data really didn't move that much over the course of the last couple of years. And even with people who've gone back to work and home internet is not as critical as it was maybe 2 years ago. So the needs are, we're streaming more, we're gaming more, we're doing, you want a Ring doorbell camera, that's poaching bandwidth.
I think we have to change the broadband conversation and let the market drive what the customer needs, and that has been very backwards in the broadband industry. I mean, our Harvard professional over here probably understands this, but we're telling the consumer what they need, and we're like, we're not even asking the question. We're like, I heard this the other day. You only need 25.3. Well, why do you tell me what I need? I don't have 100 pairs of shoes. Nobody's telling me I shouldn't go get the 101st.
Right.
So,
do you have 100 pairs of shoes?
Maybe.
How many pairs of glasses do you have?
30.
But I mean, the argument that's typically made, and this is, why the government is investing in broadband, is because it's fundamentally a market failure, right? So it just doesn't work unless you have infusion of governmental funds in some area of the...
I don't know, Shannon, how it's a failure when they're spending, like the big telcos are spending that much money on lobbying on the Hill every day. I mean, clearly they have money.
It sounds like you would challenge that. Yeah. I mean, based on everything you're saying, what you're saying now.
$8 million a
I'm not
week
an
just in
economist.
Washington.
I did go to Harvard, but I'm not an economist.
But you were at NIST, right? That's close.
No.
I mean, I thought when people went to Harvard, they knew everything. I mean...
Sorry to disappoint.
That must be Yale.
Oh, that's Yale.
We're
trying to start a fight in here.
Yeah, we take those words. One of the things we focus on the Ready or Not podcast is leadership, right? And so both of you have exhibited leadership in AAPB as well as in your personal endeavors with your companies. What are your thoughts? Why did you say that?
Because you said your personal endeavors in companies.
Was that? I didn't get the
leadership and dating.
Yeah, that's what like you were gonna go down.
No, this is a professional podcast.
He's a professional.
Keep it together. What are we doing here? What are we doing?
We throw.
So in terms of your leadership styles and approach, because I see you guys, we have fun, right? And you infuse that fun also in your professional lives. I'm gonna throw you a lifeline.
Oh, sweet.
So how does that manifest itself in your daily life in terms of Utopia, AAPB, you with as a commissioner? What's your approach to leadership, particularly to make an impact and to bridge the digital divide?
Being relatable and authentic. I think one of the things about leadership and going into some of these conversations is you're in the broadband industry. Wow, this is going to be fun.
Diabetes.
Is that
Brought to you by the late Wilford Brimley.
Kim, you were saying we can edit this
It
out.
just got too serious.
It got too serious. Go ahead.
It got too serious.
Diabetes
max.
We speak in the broadband industry, and if you go to one of these conferences, there's acronyms, there's all this technology, and it's like steers everybody away from the conversation because they're very serious and they want to talk about ponds and johns and bonds, and you're like, you've lost every bit of energy in the conversation. And then people get scared because they go to these conferences or talk to people and they don't know what any of this means. So they steer away. Yes. So talk to them like a person. Hey, did your Netflix buffer today? Let's talk about why. Go into It's frustrating, but you have to talk to people where they are instead of the technology. And the problem with the broadband industry, to some degree, is it's all a bunch of people who work in technology, who are vendors who are trying to sell you something, right? Let's talk about why you're doing this. Let's talk about the emotions behind it. And I think if you get to the emotions, then you get to the crux of the situation.
I can tell you're serious. You took the glasses off, so I have to take mine off.
All right, well, I'll give you a
We're
serious
doing the
answer.
glasses. Okay.
I'll give you a serious answer, Shannon.
she's
she's over here. Hello. So tell me about Harvard. You know,
I can actually.
His son's out.
I think the glasses off moment here
There.
is that because everything is so sales driven right now in the broadband industry, you know, I think, look, everyone's following the money, and so everyone's, you know, we're back to that place where everyone's jockeying for like a half a step forward, and you know, just, you know, we got away from that during the pandemic because I think there was this understanding that, okay, this is our industry's moment to shine, this is our moment, and we've sort of gotten back to quarterly sales goals and stuff, and I think we just have to be authentic and do the right thing. And one of the things that Kim and I really try to do, not just, you know, at AAPB, but you know, like, you know, the three of us are conference co-chairs for Broadband Communities, is we try to engage with as many newcomers, first-timers at the conference as possible. We want to be welcoming, you know, not just as chairs and hosts, but, you know, how can we put people together and create successful outcomes? And that's what's the most meaningful stuff that I think people remember over time.
It's about relationships. I think it's about building relationships and putting them in contact with the right people and just talking. I think that's what we've forgotten in sales. It's like, it is a sales quota. It's like, what do you do? Let me get you there. Let's have the relationships and really work together. It's, if we really want to change this country and connect this country, we have to stop. We have to work together. It comes down to working together and having relationships.
Relational, not transactional. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, we generally end on a final word. I think that might have been the final word. Shannan, I want to give you the opportunity to dive in and ask our guests one final question before we depart.
I did not prepare for the final word question.
So, the
Lightning
final word
round.
question. You get the final word. So,
You got
I
it.
will end it as rewarding chocolates and tequila. We're going to
We don't
end
have
on
to.
a-
That's
I know,
not
it's
tequila.
just- I
It's
told you
water.
we have a
It's
budget
water,
for
people.
water.
Casa Azul. It's a little.
We have a budget for water. We're completely off the rails, but I do want to end the podcast on a serious note and giving you an opportunity for a final word. So what do you hope to accomplish with AAPB, and where do you think we're going with the IIJA programs, you know, the announcement with NTIAs coming this year, you know, all of the focus and attention on maps? I will give you an opportunity to get the final word before
Well,
we do
I
that.
started in the broadband industry because I really like guys in polos. So
Even with the outdated logos.
Especially.
Okay,
All right.
Standards adjustment.
okay, go ahead, Bob. As I'm making a K over here.
For night or for Kim?
We're going to edit all of this out, folks. This is going to be in the behind the scenes.
We're keeping it all in. It stays. It stays.
Okay, what was the question again?
The final word, Kim. What's the final word? that
Oh,
you
you're
want
talking
to
about
hear? Yes.
I would. Why would we have to say IIJA? Let's talk about BEAD.
Let's talk about BEAD.
I
Because there's
think-
digital equity, there's BEAD, there's whatever you want to talk about.
I think
BEAD.
it's going to be interesting. I think you are going to see BEAD come out at some point. We're not sure when, but I think you're going to see more communities just take on the financial burden to build themselves.
And ultimately, what's the goal for AAPB?
Our goal for AAPB is to provide a resource and a voice for communities around the country who are endeavoring on a broadband initiative, whatever that is to really be a resource to them and give them some jokes and assistance along the way, because we have no financial gain by doing it, right? A vendor does. We are just here of other communities who are really out there trying to share the knowledge and meet them, like give them the right vendor that might hit their solution or go for their project. Bob, go
Am
for
I
it.
allowed to say a bad word?
Absolutely.
Oh,
We thrive
Final
on
word.
we thrive
are you
on
gonna say?
bad words.
Are you gonna say clusterfuck?
Final word. It's all bullshit.
Okay.
That's the problem. You know, at the end of the day, there's been too
You're
much
my
lobbying.
you're my PR person, and you just said that like you would never let me say that.
No, well, that's okay because I'm not representing a network.
Okay.
I'm only a volunteer town commissioner, and you know, if they say, "Ah, you're gone for saying bullshit on a podcast," I'm like, "All right, I'll just go mow my lawn. It'll be fine." I'll see my family. I do.
You do.
I
You don't hire that out.
I have a green John Deere riding mower. That is
Hat or no hat?
I have the hat.
Okay.
I have the hat.
Do you wear a sleeveless undergarment?
I would not subject my neighbors to that at all. You don't put this body in a sleeveless, kind of thing.
Can't hold me back.
Yeah. But I do have a burn mark from a hair straightener.
It's not a hickey, it's a hair straightener.
But no, I look, Scott. I think where AAPB is going to come into effect, and companies like Broadband Money and others, is that I don't think a lot of this money from BEAD, IIJ, whatever. I don't think it's going to go towards its intended purpose. The maps have been carved up. It's going in the wrong direction, and it's not working out okay. But we still have a community problem, and we still have to solve this problem. And so we need great minds coming together, and we need to put people in touch with great minds. And we need a lot of solutions. We need all hands, working on this issue. So if we can, get a different perspective out there, if we can bring ideas together, if we can help one city bring people together, with a solution that's working here, and bring them together with another one, I think we've got it, and then at least let's go for it.
So the brilliant mind you talked about wasn't us, right? Like, I'm just saying.
I'm just saying all of us. We're all part of an ecosystem with some brilliant minds, and especially Harvard over here.
Right.
But Scott has his son at Harvard, so I mean.
Oh, he's paying the tuition here.
I need some more broadband money.
Broadband money over here, right?
Some more gold coins. I'm gonna do a mic drop. I'm gonna take my glasses off.
Okay.
So the final word, it's all bullshit, but I mean it in a nice way.
In a nice way.
That's like a southern bless your heart bullshit.
How can we though also have fun in the process, right? I believe if you don't believe in what you're doing and not having fun, how can you wade through the bullshit and get through and make the impact that you want?
Shannan doesn't like it when we say bullshit. She gives a scornful look.
They don't say that.
I'm
They
just
don't say
pushing
that at
back against
Harvard.
the skepticism,
There you
right?
go.
Like, I don't want us to be too skeptical. I don't know. Honestly, in the ecosystem, there's room for everything. Folks that are, challenging the status quo as well as, the status quo. But at the same time, I just want to encourage people to be engaged and not kind of stand on the sidelines and just complain and say it's not right.
But you look at this conference, right? One of the big messages is that the money is going to flow away from the cities out into rural areas. And we're seeing with the FCC map, especially with broadband, that the rural areas are going to get carved up, and it's going to be really, really hard to use that money. The cities, they're kind of boxed out except on the digital equity play, and the suburbs where, the community that I live in, that I represent, there's going to be nothing for it. They're going to be like, okay, well, you've got some stuff. We have some unserved areas. I come from a leafy suburb in outside of New York, and we've got some digital equity issues. We have people who really need help. We have people who, our economy depends on it. We have a lot of financial services. People work from home. So if we want a sustainable economy, again, Economic Development Commission. That's why we're pushing for fiber.
But I think I agree with Shannan. I think sometimes we get into the trenches that we live this every day, and we forget that there is hope. And there's a lot of people that can make this happen, but they have to be resilient, and they have to be determined, and they have to go. Utopia wouldn't be in the spot we are today if we hadn't had board members who, in the darkest of days, were like, we're doing this, and having the drive. When everybody said to quit, they were like, we're still in this, and we believe this.
That reminds me of a quote Mignon Clyburn, who we had on the podcast, said, don't be, you are the arbiter of your story, right? So you are the final arbiter to your story. And don't let the haters hate. That's going to come no matter what. But at the end of the day, you control your own destiny, and you are the writer of your own story.
And she made the reference to the Theodore Roosevelt quote about being in the arena. Like, we can choose to be in the arena, or we can just throw up our hands and say it's bullshit. Like, I know you're not throwing you're obviously not doing that. You guys are active participants in the process, but people who don't know, our audience members, hopefully we want to spread the word to folks that are not involved to know about what's going on. But we can't just deem it bullshit, because otherwise what's the point?
All right, so I will retract that, and I will say some of it's bullshit, but it doesn't mean you don't try. Right, okay. And that's why we basically started this organization, with our colleagues. It's because we didn't want to be well-intended people wringing our hands on the sidelines. You got to be part of the solution, bullshit or not. You got to be in it, and it's a fight worth fighting.
There you go.
That's
I love that.
Let's end on that final word. So, want to thank you all for tuning in to another episode of the Ready or Not podcast. Kim is putting her glasses back on. I'm taking mine off. We want to thank Kim and Bob and the American Association of Public Broadband for joining us today here on site at the Marriott Marquis in Washington, D.C. at the NLC. Oh. And as we always say, be well, Godspeed. Thank you for joining us today.
All right.
All right. One take, baby.